4, 3, 2, 1.
Broadcasting live from the Newsmax studio in New York City. A fusion of politics, commentary, entertainment, and sports. Steve and his team bring you the latest news and opinion now. Here is Steve Malzberg.
Video of an incredibly radical al-Qaida offshoot celebrating the capture of the Iraqi city of Tikrit. This is the same group that 24 hours ago announced the capture of Mosul, where al-Qaida flags today fly over a town where hundreds of Americans died, driving terror forces from this region.
All right, folks, that, of course, is leading the news, the insurgency in Iraq. And Mary, good to see you for another hour. We're joined right now by Ralph Peters, a wonderful, wonderful man on so many levels. And, of course, he is, as we mentioned, Fox News strategic analyst, author of Hello, Richmond. And, Ralph, it is so great to talk to you. Say hello to Mary as well.
Hello. Hi, Mary. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for joining us.
Ralph, I know, when we talk about things like this, you get emotional, and understandably so, more so than the average person, because it hits you for so many reasons. Your reaction to what we're seeing here, these black flags of al-Qaida being raised over cities where Americans fought and died not long ago at all.
Well, this is actually so perverse and sick and unnecessary that I'm kind of beyond anger on it and just in this sort of empty disgust. Look, this didn't have to happen. Three factors went into it. The primary factor was President Obama's determination to fulfill his campaign promise at any cost to pull all the American troops out of Iraq. So he didn't make a serious effort to get a status of forceless agreement. He didn't want to leave troops there. So after many mistakes, our troops had finally won in Iraq. They had won a victory. They had smashed al-Qaida. Iraq was on the road to stability, and Obama quit. He surrendered after victory. Amazing. And terrorists love a vacuum, and it created a vacuum. The second factor was Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, a Shia, the head of the government. And he didn't govern as an Iraqi. He governed as a Shia. Now, the Shia, depending on which statistics you use, they're a plurality or a slight majority in Iraq, but either way, they are the dominant force demographically. And they just cut off the Sunnis. They weren't paying salaries, weren't doing anything to support the Sunnis in the West, because there's a lot of bad blood there going back centuries. And the Kurds were off doing their own thing in the north. And Maliki basically wasn't governing Iraq. And so that opened the door for the Sunnis, who at one point had sided with us against al-Qaida, to now side with al-Qaida's descendant, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, which is also, you also hear it as the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, same difference, just how you translate it. They're now aligned against the Baghdad government. And the third factor was that when the Syrian insurgency erupted, it was initially secular. And had we supported it then, the Middle East would be a very different place. But we didn't, and that created a power vacuum in central Syria, which the terrorists filled. So the result is that we now have, certainly in the modern age, I'm dating the modern age from 1453, that's how I date it. In the modern age, this is the first true terrorist state, the first jihadi, Islamist fanatic terrorist state we've seen. It's emerging. It de facto exists on the ground between central Syria and central Iraq, and it's expanding almost daily. Now, think about that. Because we won and quit in Iraq, because we did nothing but talk in Syria, we now have a state that belongs to a descendant of al-Qaida that is, in fact, more ferocious and ruthless than al-Qaida was. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, he's just a bloodthirsty monster. I mean, I certainly didn't like Osama bin Laden, but he had some ethics and principles within his perverted worldview. Baghdadi is just a killer. I mean, when they capture Iraqi officers, they saw off their heads, which is one of the reasons the Iraqi army is dissolving. They're terrified of this guy. They are killing civilians right and left, and they have, if they get to Baghdad, if they do. They may reach a culminating point first and have to draw back a little bit because the jihadis are actually spread pretty thin at this point, and they have long supply lines. But momentum carries you a long way, and if it carries them into Baghdad, they won't have the same problems in Baghdad that the U.S. Army did, because we were very careful not to kill civilians, to make sure of targets, to avoid urban combat if we could, and destruction. These guys, the ISIS guys under al-Baghdadi, will kill everybody they need to kill, and they will do it remorselessly and viciously and cruelly. So we're faced with a situation as of this hour we got confirmation. The Iranian Shia, Persians, of course, ethnically, the Iranians have now intervened with Revolutionary Guards Quds forces to prop up the al-Maliki regime. Within the same hour, the White House released gave us a press release through Jay Carney that President Biden spoke to Maliki and the U.S. has pledged support. Well, guess what? The Iranians are on the ground helping them, and we're pledging support, but no boots on the ground, not really offering airstrikes yet. And airstrikes at this point would be very hard to do. It's not just drone stuff anymore, and you need observers on the ground. So this is just a colossal mess with a jihadi state created among the Sunni Arabs. We're forced to help prop up a Shia radical state that emerged in Iraq after we left, which is being backed primarily by Iran. And that's just in Syria, Iraq, and Iran. I mean, the mess that this administration's rudderlessness and fecklessness and outright cowardice has created in the Middle East is without precedent. The United States position in the Middle East is at its weakest since 1945 in the emergence of the modern Middle East. It is from even beyond the Middle East, from Nigeria and Boko Haram, all through Afghanistan to Pakistan and the Taliban's recent attack on the Karachi airport. The jihadis are on the attack across a vast section of the earth, and the United States is essentially doing nothing.
Ralph, I'm going to play devil's advocate with you.
Sure.
Obama's going to come out and say, hey, we didn't quit, we won. We had a victory and we turned the country over to the people. Al-Maliki's ineffective governing isn't our fault, it's not our responsibility. He blew it, not us. So why should we go in and clean it up?
Well, I agree. I have reservations about going in and cleaning it up, but where I disagree with you is that, look, that society and every sensible person agreed, the new Iraq that had been there agreed that the Iraqis weren't ready. They needed not a U.S. fighting force. They needed a residual training force and a presence of 10 to 20,000 Americans, 15 to 20,000, to give them a fig leaf, to give the Kurdish and Sunni and Shia politicians a reason to cooperate, to tell their constituencies, yeah, we hate the Shia, but the Americans are making us cooperate. And the sheer presence would have deterred a lot of Iranian bad actors. It would have made it much harder for our special forces, would have made it very difficult, if not impossible, for al-Qaida and its offshoots to seep back in. So this wasn't a question of keeping 100,000 troops there. It wasn't a question of fighting anymore. The fighting was over. It was a question of just a residual presence. And if Americans don't do geography, but if you look at a map and see where Iraq sits, it's the keystone in the arch of the Persian Gulf. It is incredibly strategic importance, even without the world's fifth largest oil supplies. And by the way, the rebels have now, the area around Mosul, they've seized a key pipeline that goes to Turkey. Look, maybe everything will turn out wonderfully. The jihadis will find out they've outrun their supply lines. They'll stop, blah, blah, blah. But this has the potential to be the greatest disaster of the Obama presidency, and that is saying something on top of Ukraine, Syria, the mess in Afghanistan. I mean, show me a success story.
Yeah, very, very true. And of course, it's the entire Middle East, and this is the punctuation mark. And as you said, it's probably the biggest one of all. Let me ask you this. I know you talked about airstrikes when they were requested, when these people were gathering, would have been possible, but now it's virtually impossible. Where are they? Who are you going to shoot at? Who are you going to bomb? You're going to kill civilians. What can Obama do, if anything, at this point? What would you suggest?
Well, what he's probably going to do is at first just try to give them materiel, equipment, which we've already given them equipment, and they lost it to the jihadis. They don't know how to use it. They don't know how to repair it. He may try drone strikes because he doesn't want piloted aircraft in there. But the drones rely on good intelligence. We go to great pains to verify targets for drones, and they're usually in remote areas or they're on civilian concentrations. I mean, how do you use drones against an enemy that's largely in civilian clothes, often using civilian vehicles, in the middle of a major city? You know, the sad thing is, if you wanted to fix this, it would take boots on the ground, tens of thousands of boots on the ground. And we're not going to do that. And we wouldn't have had to do it had we stayed. But at this point, the winners in this one are probably going to be the Sunni jihadi terrorists and the Iranians.
What do you say to the parents of those who lost loved ones and those who lost limbs and sacrificed so much to take Fallujah, to take the towns that are now falling back into terrorist hands?
Well, it's not for me to say anything. It's for our president to apologize to them, to beg their forgiveness for squandering the sacrifice of their sons and daughters. I mean, the president has lavished more attention over 5 years on the family of a deserter, Bo Bergdahl, than he has paid to any family of a dead or wounded soldier or Marine or Navy corpsman who served honorably. This administration is morally, ethically, and practically despicable to me.
Ralph, always great to talk to you, sir. Always value your opinion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, Ralph Peters, ladies and gentlemen. He never pulls any punches, and he is always right on target, and it's just a terrible situation. Well,
they're never going to admit they did anything wrong. We know that's
Well,
not going to happen. Obama's going to kick this can down the road, and he's going to say, it wasn't my fault. Maliki screwed it up. I did everything I needed to do.
Libya, Syria, Egypt, now here in Iraq, and we're going to be out of Afghanistan, and as Frank Kona told us, it's going to be the same thing in Afghanistan, possibly 30 months after we leave there. Anyway, when we come back, we will be joined by Mark Krikorian, Executive Director of the Center for Immigration Studies. Don't go away.